Long ago, in the village of Umuchieze, nestled in the hills of Imo State, there existed an unspoken secret, a taboo the villagers would deny if confronted but whispered about when hunger gripped the land. Famine had visited Umuchieze many times, leaving desperation and darkness in its wake. In those times, tales of cannibalism would emerge, cloaked in fear and shame. Igo, a widow, lived quietly at the edge of the village. Her only hope in life was her son, Obinna, who had left for the city at just 10 years old to serve a wealthy merchant. When he returns, Ego often told herself, my suffering will end. But for 25 years, she had neither seen nor heard from him. Time and poverty had taken their toll on Ego, her once vibrant face now etched with lines of hardship. The sun blazed high over the quiet village of Umuchieze, casting long shadows under the ancient Iroko trees. The villagers moved about their day lazily, the air heavy with the lull of routine. But then, a stranger appeared on the dusty road. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his polished shoes and crisp shirt a stark contrast to the worn sandals and simple wrappers of the villagers. His skin glistened in the heat, and he carried a bag of gifts slung over one shoulder. His face, though aged with time and experience, bore faint traces of the boy he once was. He approached a group of men sitting under a tree, playing draughts. The men barely glanced up at first, focused on the game before them, until Obinna's shadow fell across the board. Good afternoon, he greeted, his voice deep and commanding, but tinged with excitement. The men looked up, their gazes narrowing as they took in his appearance. A stranger. Afternoon, one of them replied curtly. What do you want? Can someone show me the way to Madame Ego's house? Obinna asked, his smile warm and eager. The men froze, their eyes darting between each other. One, an older man with a grey beard, leaned back and crossed his arms. Why do you ask? Obinna's grin widened, pride radiating from him. I am her son, Obinna. I've come back home after 25 years. The air seemed to thicken with silence. The men stared at him as though he had just claimed to have risen from the dead. Ego's son? One of them finally muttered, his tone filled with disbelief. Yes, Obinna said, his smile faltering slightly. It's been a long time, but I've returned at last. I've missed my mother and the village so much. The grey-bearded man leaned forward, studying Obinna's face intently. Ego's son has been gone for decades, he said slowly, suspicion lacing his words. And you show up now, out of nowhere? I was serving a merchant in the city, Obinna explained, his voice steady but tinged with hurt. It took years, but I've come back to her, to my home. The men exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves. How do we even know you're telling the truth? Another man asked, his tone sharp. Obinna took a deep breath, reaching into his bag to pull out a small wooden carving. This, he said, holding it up, was the last gift my mother gave me before I left. She said it would keep me safe. The men leaned in to look, but their skepticism didn't waver. Wait here, the grey-bearded man finally said, rising to his feet. We'll fetch her. Obinna nodded, his heart pounding. He glanced around at the familiar sights of the village, but something felt off. The men whispered as they walked away, their voices carrying tones of doubt and unease. Ego was crouched behind her hut, peeling cassava when the men approached. Ego! The grey-bearded man called. She looked up, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Okay, what is it? Why are you shouting my name like this? There's a man at the square asking for you, Okay said, his voice careful. A man? Ego frowned. Who is he? He claims to be your son, Oke said, watching her closely. Ego froze, the cassava slipping from her hands. My son? Obinna? Yes, Oke said. But it's been 25 years, Ego. How could he suddenly reappear? Ego's heart raced. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Hope, fear, doubt. Are you sure it's him? She whispered, her voice trembling. We don't know, another man chimed in. He says he has proof, but it's better if you see for yourself. Ego hesitated, clutching her chest. The boy she had prayed for every night, the son she had believed was lost forever. Could it really be him? I'll come, she said, finally, her legs trembling as she stood. When Ego arrived at the square, the crowd had grown. The villagers whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on Obinna. As soon as Obinna saw her, his face broke into a radiant smile. Mama! He called, stepping forward. Ego stopped in her tracks, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. This man, this stranger, was claiming to be her son, but she couldn't recognize him. It's me, Mama, Obinna said, his voice thick with emotion. Obinna, your son,
Ego's
I've
lips
come home.
parted, but no words came out.
She studied his face, searching desperately for the boy she had held in her arms so many years ago. She stammered. I don't know you. Obinna's smile faltered. Mama, it's me, he pleaded, taking another step closer. I've changed, yes, but I'm still your son. I've come back to you. The villagers murmured louder, their doubts growing. Ego, Namdi said gently, are you sure you don't recognize him? Ego shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. My son was a boy when he left. This man is a stranger. Obinna's heart shattered. He reached into his bag and pulled out the wooden carving. Mama, you gave me this, he said, his voice breaking. You told me to keep it safe, and I did. Doesn't this prove who I am? Ego stared at the carving, her hands trembling. It looked familiar, but her fear and doubt clouded her judgment. I don't know, she whispered, stepping back. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered, we need to be careful. He could be lying. Obinna looked around, his heart sinking. The reunion he had dreamed of for years was crumbling before his eyes. The love and joy he had carried in his heart were met with suspicion and rejection. Namdi stepped forward, placing a hand on Obinna's shoulder. You will stay in the village tonight, he said firmly. We'll sort this out in the morning. Obinna nodded numbly, tears streaming down his face. As the villagers dispersed, the warmth of his homecoming turned cold, and the shadows of doubt began to grow. Little did he know, the night ahead would bring a tragedy that would change everything. That evening, the villagers gathered in secret. Food was scarce, and the so-called stranger seemed like an opportunity. He's probably lying, one elder said. He's a wanderer trying to take advantage of us. What if he isn't lying? Ego asked, her voice faint. If he were truly your son, you would have recognized him. He's a threat, Ego, the elder insisted. Blinded by fear and manipulation, Ego reluctantly agreed. Fine, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Do what you must. The villagers moved swiftly. Under the cover of darkness, they entered the hut where Obinna was sleeping. Wake up! They barked, dragging him from his bed. What are you doing? Mama, help me! Obinna cried, struggling against them. You lied to us, stranger! One man shouted. Mama, it's me, Obinna screamed, his voice breaking. Please, don't let them do this. But Ego remained in her hut, her hands trembling, her heart heavy. The villagers ended Obinna's life that night, dividing his remains among themselves. Ego, though reluctant, was pressured into eating alongside them. The next morning, Onze Namdi, Obinna's uncle, arrived in the village. He carried bags of goods and money, excited to reunite Obinna with his mother. Ego, he called out cheerfully as he approached her hut. Where is Obinna? I hope he arrived safely. Ego froze, her hands trembling. Obinna, she whispered. Yes, Obinna. He left the city 3 days ago. I sent him home with gifts for you. Didn't he arrive? The color drained from Ego's face. No, she stammered. Suddenly, the truth dawned on Namdi. He turned to the villagers, his voice sharp. The man who came last night, where is he? The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. What have you done? Namdi roared. Ego's knees buckled as the memories of the previous night flooded her mind. No, it can't be, she wailed. It was Obinna! Namdi shouted. You killed him! You ate him! He was your son! Ego screamed, clutching her head. My son! My Obinna! No! Her cries echoed through the village as she stumbled into the open, pulling at her hair. What have I done? What have we done? Her grief consumed her as she collapsed to the ground. The villagers, realizing the gravity of their actions, fell silent, their faces pale with horror. From that day on, Ego wandered the village, muttering to herself, her mind lost to the weight of her guilt. Obinna, my son, forgive me, she would whisper, her eyes vacant. The village of Umuchieze was never the same. The story of Ego and her son spread far and wide, a grim reminder of the darkness that can arise from fear and desperation. The winds that blew through Umuchieze carried the haunting cries of a mother who had unknowingly destroyed her only child. Even today, the tale is told as a warning to always recognize the faces of those who matter most and to never let fear cloud the truth.